So on 10th of July, as we all know, that the Supreme Court heard the petitions which challenged the ECI's special intensive revision, that is the SIR of the electoral rules. We are now going to discuss about what the Supreme Court has said in the judgment, rather not the judgment but in its hearing, and what are the certain contentions which were raised by the petitioners in this regard, and what are the problems with this electoral revision. So the Supreme Court of India declined to stay the ECI's SIR of electoral rules in Bihar, which is scheduled ahead of the assembly elections in Bihar, which are scheduled in October-November 2025. Amid concerns which were raised by the petitioners over the timing and the process and methodology which the Election Commission is trying to apply in order for this revision, the court has urged and rather suggested the ECI to consider other alternative documents apart from the 11 that they had already prescribed in their press note, like the Aadhaar card, ration card, or the voter ID cards, which are easily available to the population of Bihar. So if we look at the background of the electoral roll revision, we recognize that this special intensive revision involves a fresh preparation of the electoral rolls through house-to-house verification by electoral registration officers, also known as EROs. The applicability in Bihar, if we talk about, so there are two time frames which have been talked about. So first is that those who were already registered in the 2003 electoral roll, they have to just provide an extract that yes, they were registered in this electoral roll and nothing else. The actual problem and challenge arises for those who were not registered in this 2003 electoral roll, and those who have started their registration post 2003. They have to provide one of the 11 prescribed documents in order to prove that their place of birth and their timing of birth or the date of birth is at a prescribed format. So this is how we are going to recognize it. So those listed on the 2003 rolls need only to submit an extract, whereas those enrolled after 2003 must submit any one of or more of the 11 prescribed documents and a pre-filled enumeration form to establish birthplace and date, indirectly serving as a citizenship determination process, which was essentially one of the concerns which was raised by the petitioners. If we now look at what the key observations of Supreme Court were, so the major concerns which were raised by the petitioners include number one, that is the timing of the revision. As we all are aware that October-November 2025, just 2.5 or 3 months away from now, the revision has started. The assembly elections are scheduled. So in that case, given the huge populace of Bihar, it has been a contention that such an extensive process is actually difficult to complete in these 2 to 3 months, and so we require more timing. So this was the first argument, that this revision is timed too close to the assembly elections. And another demand, which again the petitioners have put, is that the ECI may continue with such revision, but then they must de-link it with the electoral revision process. This process must be dealing from the assembly elections, so that there is no overlap between the two, and the voters who are eligible enough, they can vote for this process without any cumbersome procedure to be followed. So this was the first, that the timing is problematic. The second, the kind of documents that the ECI has asked for and those which were excluded. So as we all are aware that the petitioners had already argued in the court that exclusion of important documents like Aadhaar card, which is a very prominent document to verify a person's place and date of birth, apart from ration card, which is a document which will be most easily available to the populace of Bihar. In that case, exclusion of these important documents actually makes most of the population of Bihar vulnerable, given that they are not in a position to procure the 11 documents that are prescribed. And in that case, they actually fear that they might be disenfranchised from voting, and this may lead to their violation of rights. So this was again the second concern. Again, another concern was that the voter disenfranchisement, as I'm already talking about. So petitioners had warned that the lack of accepted documentation could actually exclude genuine voters who have been voting for long, but since they're not able to provide for the documentation, they won't be able to vote, leading to violation of their rights despite that they were eligible voters. Also, one of the proofs or the evidences that the petitioners provided was that the Bihar, report or a survey in Bihar through the government had actually revealed that most of the voters did not possess the required certificates that were prescribed by the ECI. So this is a very strong argument in that regard. Now, what the Supreme Court has essentially ruled, or rather talked about in their hearing. The first, the Supreme Court has declined to provide an interim stay and has allowed the Election Commission to continue with its electoral revision, provided that in any case the Supreme Court feels that there has been any violation of the procedures required or any kind of rights. In that case, the Supreme Court may intervene and take possible actions which it can. The second is that the Supreme Court has rather suggested the ECI to include documents like Aadhaar card, voter ID cards, and the ration cards, but have left it to the discretion of ECI on whether or not they would like to adopt these documentation as well for the verification process. The third, the rationale for transparency. So the Supreme Court has also asked the ECI that in case they refuse to include these three documents or exclude any of the required documents, in that case they will have to provide, the ECI per se has to provide requisite and proper reasoning and rationale why they are actually excluding these documents, in order to ensure that there is proper transparency and nothing is done arbitrarily in an as important procedure or a process like the voting revision or the voting rules revision. Now, what are the three legal questions that were identified by the Supreme Court which they are going to hear in the next hearing on July 28th? So the first question was, what are the powers of the Election Commission under the Constitution? The second question deals with the kind of procedure and methodology which the Election Commission is going to adopt throughout this procedure of electoral revision. And third is whether the timing of this electoral roll revision is problematic with respect to the fact that the elections, the assembly elections in Bihar are too close and scheduled in October, November. So in that regard, now what we have to see is what is the ruling of Supreme Court in the next hearing of July 28th, and whether we get a perfect concrete answer or whether again the question is going to be deferred to a later date. But yes, certainly this is a very important question because it has direct bearing on the right to vote of the people, and in any case it must be protected. So let's see what happens now.